If you don't believe in the strategy of the business I'm running, don't buy our shares.
You took it from hundreds of employees to thousands.
I knew I was paralysed straight away because, of course, my legs were the only thing that wasn't cold.
Steve, that's a phenomenal story. So, Steve, you've got a fantastic story, being leader of a FTSE 250 company, PageGroup, for 17 years, and then also going through a life-changing injury. It's really fantastic to chat to you. Can I start on the business side?
Sure.
You were CEO of a FTSE 250 company for 17 years, which is probably some sort of
survivor. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you took it from hundreds of employees to thousands, nearly 10,000 employees in the space of that time.
Yeah.
So you basically took, not quite a startup, but you took a small company and turned it into a global mammoth. Talk us through that.
I mean, the weird thing is my degree is in metallurgy and material science. So, I mean, it's a bizarre thing. I'm suddenly in recruitment. But working for Johnson Matthey and being in metallurgy it didn't float my boat. When I got into recruitment and joined the business that then became PageGroup, I felt like I'd come home. I loved it. I mean, it wasn't work. It was fun. You know, it was really enjoyable and so on. I knew Michael Page, the founder, and I wish I had been him. And he had a really clear strategy on how we could grow it, and I believed that strategy. And I guess all I did was accelerate it. And he retired quite quickly. He didn't like managing large businesses. And he said he wasn't good at it either. And so as time went on, I ended up running it, and we just had a great formula that we were able to sort of replicate around the world in underdeveloped markets until we got to where we got when I retired.
You make it sound easy.
I don't know. The biggest challenge is people, because we haven't got a point of difference apart from the people. And in recruitment, you know, it's very easy to move from one firm to another, which is often why people are surprised I stayed 37 years in the same organisation, because, you know, people do jump from recruitment company to recruitment company, you know, and you take off often your clients with you, and it's very easy to do that. You know, you move for a better deal and so on. So we had to create an environment where people didn't want to move. They wanted to work for you. They wanted to work for the culture. They wanted to work for the business, the direction we were going in, the success. And hopefully the career paths we could offer them. And it worked. We believed in the company, if you had a successful career and you progressed and you became, you know, manager, director, managing director, whatever, but you weren't just on the best commission deal. I mean, for a start, we didn't really pay commission. We paid team bonuses. So it was your contribution, and contribution can be measured in a lot of qualitative ways, not just, you know, the numbers, not just the number of placements or the fees you charge. So it was about working as a team, and that's what I enjoyed. All my sports were team sports and so on. So I didn't like the whole commission thing that exists in the industry generally. And that exists from the top of the pile, you know, the best search companies right the way down to the high street. We were very different. You had to trust your boss, that your boss would make a good decision on what your contribution was at the end of each quarter or the end of a year if you're a director. And I can't say that in 37 years I wasn't disappointed some years and amazed other years, you know, but it wasn't the best deal. It was where people felt comfortable and they felt they could thrive and get promoted and have a really successful career that made them stay, not just the money.
You created a whole team culture.
Which to me, it's like if you've got a whole group of people all going in the same direction, all helping each other to try and achieve the same goal, you're going to be more powerful than an individual. It's obvious, but to most recruitment companies, it's not. And you have to think, I mean, in the UK, there are tens of thousands of recruitment businesses, the average size being 1 or 5 people, and they're owner managed. It's a great philosophy for a small owner to say, I'll only pay you if you're successful. Well, that's not very trusting. You know, I'll pay you good money because you're good quality, and I know you'll deliver. So, and that was said. So the majority of the people that joined us, we hired them from the professions we wanted them to recruit in. So if we were going to be recruiting accountants, then we recruited an accountant. A lawyer, we'd recruit a lawyer. Because then we can sit in an interview and talk, you know, that profession knowledgeably. And again, comes back to, you as a candidate are going to be more impressed if you're a lawyer, if you're talking to a lawyer. And that's how it works.
So it sounds like a very decent company.
Yeah, it was.
And was that Was that something that you or someone, literally sits down and goes, we are going to develop this culture, or, we're going to put these things in place, no commission, long-term approach. Was that something done deliberately, or was it just how it sort of happened?
Michael Page, the guy who formerly we were known as Michael Page, he put that long-term strategy, the organic growth, the non-commission, he put that in place. He didn't put in place, and the meritocracy of if you're good, doesn't matter what you are or who you are. He didn't focus on the culture, and it's fair to say, I think, industries 40 years ago didn't really think much about cultures. And, so for example, today, obviously the focus is on sustainability and diversity and all of these things. No, I mean, we were a company that was about working hard, playing hard, rewarding for success, promoting people and so on. It was probably closer, if I'm honest, to the Wolf of Wall Street than it was to an inclusive culture that I wanted to create. And so when I took over as CEO, that became my driving force. I felt everybody should have an equal opportunity. And I knew as a result, all people would come to work wanting to be successful and to enjoy themselves. And there was some amazingly emotional stories on that. And if people can be open about who they are and what they are and everything else and their needs or whatever it is, then you're probably going to get more out of them. And, if you can drive productivity, and as you said, we grew to 10,000 people, you drive productivity a couple of % from all of those people, and you've got a really successful business.
Steve, do you think companies undervalue their people?
Without doubt. I mean, I think they underestimate how important the people are, and it's all about the technology and it's all about everything else. For me, if you get the people right, most things will probably ensue. And, if you're getting the people right and you're giving them the right platform to speak and share ideas and all of this sort of good stuff, the chances are the rest will fall into place. If you train somebody up and they're really successful and they're running a country or they're running a business within a country and then they leave, you've gone from, having a real resource to nothing. They've gone. And so, why lose them because they want to be a mum? Why lose them because they need to move from one geography to another? Or you've created a culture that they don't like anymore or whatever. It's madness. So to me, it was always about create a culture that people want to work in and stay in. There might have been things I'd love to do and personally, but they weren't right for the audience I was trying to keep in the business and keep productive. So create the culture that they want and need.
And when you were expanding, all over the world, I mean, that must have been tricky, mustn't it? You're going into different languages, as you mentioned.
Great fun, though.
You're going different languages, different cultures, different laws, different processes, hiring and firing people. How can you expand internationally like that? There's so many graveyards for companies who try to go international.
We had a few. I mean, you don't always get it right. I usually wanted to take a look myself, particularly some of the bigger markets that I thought were really big opportunities. So I'll give you an example, India. And I remember going to India about, I don't know, whatever it was, 15 years ago. And we phoned up and arranged prior to going all of our favourite clients, all the ones we knew we had a relationship with. So right from our bankers, which were HSBC, right the way through clients I'd had, since I was a boy in recruitment, Colgate, these sorts of people. And we would literally go and of course, the first mistake I made was because we went to Mumbai first and then Delhi, Gurgaon. And the first mistake I made was I set up all of these client meetings about 2 hours apart. And of course, in Mumbai, you're not going to get to the next client meeting because the traffic's so dreadful. But we whizzed around all of these clients. And I remember going to Colgate, for example, and I said, so who are your competition here? I mean, the Unilevers, the Procter & Gamble's, and they said, no, it's a bush. And I'm like, sorry? And they said, no, it's a bush that grows in the countryside and so on. And the majority of the population are using twigs off this bush to keep their teeth clean. And I said, wow. I said, does it work? And they said, well, actually, it does work quite well. But, we'd like to think Colgate toothpaste is better. But you learn these things, and you have to learn, well, what are the rules that are going to hold you back? What are the cultural differences? And so we made a big mistake. I went down there with another senior director who would be running it, not on the ground, but would be running it. And we interviewed a whole bucket of people, mostly graduates, some raw graduates, so straight from university. Big mistake. I mean, it was like a schoolboy error, because 90% of the population there that graduate then go on to do an MBA. So they'll work for 2 years and then they'll leave and go off and do an MBA. So, of course, we hired these people. Some of them are really good. Year and a half, 2 years later, they've gone. Mm. Actually, we should have been hiring people who'd done their MBAs. And again, we tried all sorts of different solutions to trying to make sure that the culture followed ours, because you've got to get this balance between what's right in India for Indian people with what's right for Page.
And when you expanded internationally, how long would you take a loss in the new market? Obviously, there's a setup cost. It's going to take some time.
Some made money in the first year. Some made money in year 8 or 9 or 10. But the thing is, you could make. I'll tell you one story. I sent a guy who'd only ever lived in Harrow, in London, and I said, look, you've worked 17 years for us, or whatever the time was. I said, you can carry on commuting in from Harrow for the rest of your career till you're 60 or whatever and retire, or you could do an international placement. And I moved him and his wife Kat, and babies at the time, 2 babies, to Shanghai. And I think at the time in Shanghai and Beijing we had about 15, 20 people. And I said, you're going there to crack the formula of how we make a big business in China and become the market leader, which is, not something you can do every day as a Western company. And anyway, he went there. And I remember, actually, I was probably sloping off for a golf day, I think, if I'm honest. And I was in my car, and I'm not a music listener. And so I was thinking, who can I phone? Oh, well, at this time of the morning, I can phone anyone in Asia. So I'll phone Andy and I'll say, how's it going? And I phoned him up and he said, great. I said, how's it going? And I said, how's Kat? How's the kids? Have you got settled? Have you found somewhere to live? How's Charlie the driver? He was always spitting out the window. And he said, all good, all good. And he said, I've got really big news. And I said, what's that? He said, we've made a profit in the month. And I said, I won't say the words I used, but I was very annoyed. And
Sorry, you were annoyed when he said he made a profit?
Yeah, because he made a profit out of about 15 people, and it would probably just about cover my flight to China and back if I went over to visit him. And to me, that's not really very helpful when you're trying to be a global leader in the market. And I said, it's not about making a profit in 1 month in the year and it's $7,000 or whatever. It's about building a big business. And therefore, what I want to hear from you is how you've worked out what makes a successful Chinese recruiter working for Page. And if we can crack that formula, then we can have a business of 500 people, and then you can start delivering profit in the millions. So in answer to your question earlier about how long we would take losses, for years in a market that was potentially huge, because to me, it's like India. Why make a short-term profit that's probably not a lot when you could make a huge profit? And that's where we are in India now, or they are in India now, I should say. And so you'd be investing in new people, investing in new offices, taking bigger office space because you've now gone from 50 to 70 or whatever. You'd be opening in Bangalore because you now need a third office or whatever it is. And that would keep driving it into losses. Mm. So
it's interesting what you say, because by being by that stage a medium-large company, you had the financial muscle to do that. And I sort of talk about the difficulty in the UK, for example, or in Europe, is this sort of bipolar world in financing companies. Mm. So what I call your approach is sort of what I call infinite startups. Companies start up, and say in the United States particularly, where there's billionaire money, and they go to lunch. I'm exaggerating a bit, but they go to lunch and they take a little business plan or even just an idea over a glass of wine. They leave with 20 million, and they're told, don't make a profit, just get market share. Mm. And they're financed, and then they've got another round of financing. There's money there, and then in China you've got government money. So which is almost doing the same thing. They want
Yep.
to own, whatever it is, the software, the AI market or anything, and they'll pump money into the right companies to make sure that happens. Where in Europe, particularly in the last 10 years, where been on boards of companies trying to raise money, trying to raise 5 or 10 million. Look, you have 100 meetings. The capital markets is really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know when you're going to make a profit. There's not this infinite startup where you'll take a loss just to get market share. That attitude, unfortunately, for so many small, medium-sized companies here, doesn't exist.
Yep.
It really is the opposite. You've got to make a profit. So it's interesting what you say, and that can be necessary, but it may mean that Europe and UK are being squeezed out by the US and China.
Yeah, I mean, look, public companies as well, because, we were answerable quarterly. We produce trading results every quarter. And, and then we had to, talk to shareholders and justify why we were up or down or whatever we were doing. And, they would, without doubt, I had shareholders arguing vehemently, just close Brazil or whatever, because Brazil had a, election, and we'd suddenly gone from being our 5th most profitable country to our 37th most profitable country, and they'd say, just close it. And I go, no, I'm thinking long term. And they go, well, I've got a book to run here, and your shares are in it, and I can't wait for 10 years. And I go, well, tough. And, and I remember having really bitter arguments with them. And I said, you've always got a choice. You just sell your shares. And I'm quite comfortable with that. If you don't believe in the strategy of the business I'm running, don't buy our shares. And, but if you've been a CEO for 1 year, you're not going to say that. Well, it takes a brave person. If you've been a CEO for 10 years, you can. Because you've had enough successful years, hopefully, to be able to, stand up to them and go, nonsense. I'm right, you're wrong. If you really, believe in that you're right, well, vote with your feet. And I remember, literally, it was an American shareholder, big shareholder, had 9% of the company in California. And they, this sort of argument went on. We were both a bit, angry and literally. And he said, and also you should close Houston. And I said, sorry? And I said, it's the 4th biggest city in America. And I said, it's got so many tax breaks that a lot of companies are opening there, and big investment for pharmaceutical, all the, the future industries and so on, technology. I said, not a chance. And he said, it's a swamp. And I said, well, I know that's the opinion in America of Houston, but at the end of the day, it's a great economy. And of course, it went on to become a really profitable office for us. And and I'm not American, but so you just have to believe in your strategy sometimes and take pain either from shareholders. And it's the same thing. We, when our market, 70% of our costs were people. And so when things like the global financial crisis hit you, or COVID hits you, or whatever, interviewing, it's the last thing a company wants to be focused on. They're focused on saving the business or whatever it is, or understanding where the hell it's all going to go with COVID hitting us and so on. And of course, we're faced with our model being about meeting people and you typically face to face and so on. And we're trying to fathom it all out. And I'm not firing people. And they're going, cut your costs. And I go, the only way I can cut my costs, because I can't get rid of offices that I've got a 10-year lease on. I haven't got anything else to get rid of. It's just people. You want me to get rid of the people? It could take us 5, 10, 15 years to build it back up again. So I won't.
Was the company making losses?
No.
So still profitable.
We've never made a loss. But the difference is we went from 149 million operating profit in 2019, the year I broke my back. And in 2020, we made 25. It would be a fairly catastrophic in anyone's eye, I suppose, fall from high profitability to low.
But no one expected COVID to last forever.
When the world, what they always say when you're investing, when the world's at its darkest and you feel the worst, then invest. And actually, that COVID, I wish the one thing that had lasted from COVID was the weather, because it was great, wasn't it? And I remember that fantastic 3 months of sunshine, and we're all forced to work from home, and we're all fathoming out what COVID means for us and what the long-term implications are and whether we've got it or not, and all of these things. And I weirdly broke all the titanium in my back, so I was in excruciating pain. And of course, simple things like MRIs and CT scans were, a no-no during COVID, because no hospital would accept you. Anyway, I managed to get them done eventually, and we'd gone from, in April, me doing a video to all of my staff, including all the directors, saying I want all of my directors, 450 of them worldwide, all with contracts written by local markets and so on. I want them all to take a 20% salary cut. I said, look, guys, girls, you've worked for me for 15, 20 years. You know this is serious. None of us know what COVID means for the business, the model, and so on. And I need to be able to have vision to be able to see what's going on and what we need to do. And so it did save us a lot of money. And I think, and I said, of course, that includes me. And but we're well paid in the good times. So look, this is a short-term pain. And I remember I had the titanium replaced eventually, just as in early July. And I put on a half-decent white shirt and I did another video and said, right, we know what's going on now. We're going to put everybody back to full salary. And we're going to go on one of the most aggressive hiring sprees the company's ever seen. And we're going to go out and steal 150, as many people as we can. It was 1,500 people from the competition, but we're going to do it one by one. So we're not going to acquire a business. We're just going to hire people from the competition.
Can I ask you just a different tact? The recruitment, as I'm sure you know, it's a very difficult market right now for particularly young people, but for anyone looking for a job, it's almost soul destroying. You get now apparently the CVs are read by AI, and it's very, very tough, and the unemployment rate's high anyway, and the youth unemployment's high, and the graduate unemployment's high. Are there any tips? Are there any takeaways for people who are out there looking for a job?
Look, the best will always get jobs. I mean, that they will. And that's never going to change. So how do you make yourself the best? And I don't just mean by, being keen at school and getting the best grades, because I certainly am not a good example of that particularly. But, it's about building a background to your whole resume, if you like, whatever the AI are apparently reading. It's about building one that's actually interesting, makes you unique, makes you different to others, makes you actually good, makes you stand out, makes you want to be hireable. And so in that occasion where you finally land an interview and, it's taken you a long time, you actually get the job. And also making sure that you've got the skills to get through that hoop. So whatever hoops are going to be thrown at you by a company that's hiring, you've got to be prepared for it. And it absolutely baffles me how often people go into an interviewing process and they haven't even prepared. Like, have you thought about the questions they're going to ask? What do you mean? I don't know what they're going to ask. Well, I can pretty well tell you. I mean, it's a first interview in a company. I can probably guarantee I'll be able to tell you half the questions they'll ask you. So why don't you actually think of what you want to answer, what the answers are?
So what preparation is it? Knowing about the company you're being interviewed by?
Well, obviously doing your research in the company, and that's so easy now, isn't it? I mean, back in the day, you had to phone up and get a brochure. Now you just go online and look them up. But I mean, more and understand their culture and probably the angles they're going to be asking for, what sort of people they look for. Look at the people on the website that have actually been successful, and maybe think about how you align yourself to them, whatever. But the reality as well is, we all know, particularly at that level, the sorts of questions they're going to ask you. What are your strengths? What have you done so far that stand out?
We'll start by having a genuine interest in what you're going to do or what you're hoping to do.
Sure, but when you were young, I'm sure it was the case as well, back in the day in Australia probably, you did loads of jobs, summer jobs, whatever, to pay the bills, to, et cetera, et cetera. And I certainly did. And if I listed every single job I did when I was a kid, from cleaning this or planting this or picking strawberries or whatever it was, I did loads of different things. And so when people said to me, have you got a work ethic? And I'd say, well, I've done a lot of jobs. I've never been fired from any of them. I took it upon myself to get those jobs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you're just pointing to something that makes you a little bit different. And I do think sometimes when and I'm literally was arranging on the way here, I'm giving somebody a young graduate career advice who wants to go into recruitment, so he's popping around for a coffee next week. And, I will put him through the sort of interview that he'll get when he gets to
practice.
I've got a little bit of practice.
So that's one tip. Do practices with whoever you can.
Literally.
So, Steve, we have the chessboard here. It's a boardroom. So I'm going to ask you some chess-related questions.
Oh my God. Okay.
Do you? No, not about. When you think about business, do you think more like a chess player or more like a gambler?
Probably somewhere in between, because I will never completely recklessly gamble just for the fun of it. I might bet blackjack or something, but even in blackjack, I'm not the most academic, but numerically, I'm pretty good. And I'll always work out the odds and the likelihood, and I think it's the same in business. You know, you ultimately have to gamble. You know, you have to go, okay, the time is right, we're going to open our doors in India, we're going to open 2 offices, not 1, and we're going to put down some real roots here very quickly, and it's going to cost a lot of money. That's a gamble, but in order to do that, I will also make sure I'm rich with data.
Right, so you look at the board, you make a calculated decision.
Yeah.
Do you think there's second question, there's no luck in chess. Is there luck in business, and how much luck did you have?
Definitely there is some luck on timing, without doubt, because of course you don't know what's around the corner for the globe. You know, there could be, we sit here today, don't we? There could be a war. Of course. Did I know that was going to happen?
But apart from big macro events,
no, but big macro
just winning
events
a contract here or there, is that?
They can also make a massive difference as well. And you know, look, I was always told a long time ago, you make your own luck.
Do you consider being the first mover in business an advantage or an occasional disadvantage?
Generally an advantage. We weren't always the first, because sometimes there was a local player that was already quite big. But generally, as an international company, we were probably the first or very early.
I wanted to talk to you about your personal story. I mean, it's an amazing story. Do you mind me asking you about it?
No, not at all.
So, you know, I read about you, you know, going skiing and going off-piste, presumably, and ending up taking a wrong turn. Yeah, ending up in a riverbed and badly injured.
Yes, yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I thought of myself as a reasonable skier. I wasn't great. I was actually not off-piste. I mean, I'll admit it. I was on a blue slope, so the easiest arguably, and it was a miserable day. So the lifts were closed. It was in a place called Wengen in Switzerland, where they have trains that go to the top. So I thought I'll get the train up. My girlfriend at the time was having a skiing lesson, so I was on my own. And I thought I'll just amble down the other side to a place called Grindelwald and get the train back up. And I caught an edge, so I did go off-piste then. So I went off the slope, missed the bridge I was meant to go over, and disappeared into this river. And yeah, I knew I was paralysed straight away, because, of course, my legs were the only thing that wasn't cold. Because when you're lying in a river in the Alps, I quickly learned how cold those the rivers are. And but weirdly, and I remember thinking, gosh, this is a strange feeling, because I was lying there and the water's everywhere and I'm freezing, but my legs aren't. I mean, of course, I can't feel my legs anymore. And so I knew I was paralysed. So I realised that my real challenge was getting out of there. You know, when your legs don't work, I was obviously in quite a bit of pain, but it was how do I get out of there? Nobody can see me. I know not many people are skiing. It's windy. It's snowing. You know, I can shout, but will they be able to hear me? So I need to try and time my shouting with somebody going by. But that's really difficult when you can't see onto the slope. So, and I knew that hypothermia, you know, I come from the coast, so I sort of knew that hypothermia can grip very, very quickly. And it'll make me want to go to sleep, and it'll make me want to bow out. And so I knew I'd have to fight that, and I wouldn't have long. You know, my dad always used to tell me, you know, you can just drift offshore, and, you know, it can take an hour or so in the middle of the summer, and you can still die of, you know, of hypothermia. And so I threw things. I basically threw my gloves. Nothing happened, so I was just colder.
Trying to get attention.
Trying to get attention. I thought if I throw my black gloves up onto the bridge that I was meant to go over, because the bridge was behind me, then they would stop to pick the gloves up, and then I would perhaps get a chance to shout to them or whatever. But nothing happened, so I was then sort of, well, what else do I throw? And you can tell by my hairstyle, throwing my helmet would have been made me even colder. So I threw my ski poles, but of course I wanted to make sure that if I threw them, they came back to me so I could throw them again and keep doing this. And By then I really was fighting hypothermia, because you see all these dramatic films where they go, Richard, stay with us, keep talking, and you sort of laugh and go, really? Yeah. But I realised then that, if you go to sleep, it would be lovely, but it's a one-way street. And so
you're not getting adrenaline.
You just have to fight it. It is just hypothermia. It's basically saying, shut the body down, protect it. But of course, in an environment like that, you do that and nobody finds you till it's too late. So I'm fighting that. I'm trying to throw this ski pole lying on my back in a river with a broken back, which is not easy. And I was very lucky. A French dude had just stopped at the top of the slope. He was waiting for his family to catch up. He thought he could hear somebody. And then as they arrived, he'd say, look, see if you can hear it. And they were looking up the slope, apparently, because I guess the echo. And then he probably got fed up and thought, well, I'm going to go down this slope, looked down the slope and saw my ski pole spinning. And he said, I think he's down there. And he skied down and said, can I help? And which I, again, remember thinking that's a pretty stupid question. But yeah, and he got help very quickly, fortunately, and they got me out of there. But literally, as the helicopter arrived, that's about the last thing I remember, is a helicopter arriving, and the mountain rescue guy climbed down, and then the doctor did, and then I fell into a coma. And
so it really was touch and go. Another hour, you would have been in deep trouble.
Yeah, I mean, my body temperature was 30 degrees, which is pretty well as low as it can go without your heart stopping. And what actually, I don't know which would have got me first, the hypothermia, or I later discovered that when they scanned me when I got to hospital to work out, they were trying to gradually warm me up, but at the same time, they're trying to work out, well, what is the priority that we need to fix here? We know about the hypothermia. And so they scan you, and they found out that I had 1.5 litres of blood in my lungs, because I'd smashed so many ribs, they'd shattered and gone into my lungs. So I guess I was internally slowly drowning, and so they had to stick drains in the side of my chest to get all of that out. And once they got that under control, and actually the thoracic guys put metal on my ribs to give my ribs a quicker chance of recovery, so that I could focus on my back, which was my spine. Breaking your spine takes a lot more rehab than a few ribs, but ribs they're painful. So they put metal on my ribs, and then I guess after all of that, and once I'd warmed up and there were no risk to me, my heart or anything else, then they did my back and sorted that out.
Yeah, I know. I read it was very, very painful, very slow.
It was.
But what was remarkable was how quickly you got back into the office. But really, one comment you said that you were a better manager when you went back than before your accident.
Yeah, I think so, because when you've come that close to, I suppose, dying without sounding too dramatic, and it made me think what's important. I saw my kids in Switzerland, and when I woke up and I saw the level of anxiety I'd created, and I'd frightened the shit out of them, frankly, and that's not something a dad should do. And
how did that make you a better manager?
Because I think I was more empathetic towards everybody.
You sounded like you were very empathetic beforehand, a very good, kind CEO, and this made
not
you
always
even kinder.
kind. There'll be plenty of ones out there that said he wasn't kind at all. He fired me, but I would say you deserved it.
So
but
you became a little bit softer, would you say?
I don't think softer. No, I just understood people better, and so. I mean, put simply, I had 3.5 months off, and then I went back to work. Well, that was weird in itself, forgetting what I'd been through.
So it might have just been perspective.
It made me realise what it was like for women, for example, coming back from maternity. Because, it's one thing going on holiday for a couple of weeks, but suddenly being away for 3.5 months and then going back, it was very strange. Going back equally as a mother, when you've got, something else on your mind now, equally going back with me thinking I left this office 6'4" and now I'm coming back 4'6", and I'm wheeling around the office, wondering about when my bladder needs emptying, because I can't obviously feel my bladder anymore, and so you've got completely different challenges, and it makes you realise. I did a strange thing, I think, probably when I was in a hospital. I was getting thousands of messages because everybody knew me. I'd probably had a beer with most people in the company, it felt like at times, and because I was very, very well travelled. And they were sending me messages saying, Steve, when you're back in China, we'll run the Great Wall of China again. And, because I did the half marathon there. And I'd run in Centennial Park in Sydney or Central Park in New York, whatever. And, I used to run with other consultants and people, and they'd say, oh, we'll do that again, and, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, you don't realise I'm now in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. So I did a video, and I remember getting the carers in the middle of the night to help me on with a shirt, and I was absolutely racked with pain. And they sat me up, so I sort of looked half sensible, and I did a video, and it was probably, 30 minutes telling them what had happened. And, I went through the river and the scenario of getting help and, how I felt about it, what I was going to do, the impact it had on my kids. I cried on the video, and this was all at 4:30 in the morning.
Was the crying on the video, did you keep it on the footage?
Of course, yeah.
And you sent that to staff?
You see, I think the days of a sort of a bulletproof,
yes,
incredible, CEO that's got no feelings and all the rest of it is hard as nails. Well, that's just not the reality, and I'm like anyone else. But
that's an incredible culture, even to feel that, from you to them, to feel like you can share that. Steve, that's a phenomenal story. I mean, it's got everything, success and struggles in it. It's really fantastic. Can I finish on one question? If you were to give one piece of business advice in 1 or 2 sentences, what would it be?
Get the people right, and then work really hard.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Stephen.
Pleasure.